Welcome to your first pre-lab instructional video. This is topic 1A, working with variables in Jamovi. So my expectation is that you will have watched this video prior to coming to your lab time and that you will be working on the Jamovi file that you have on your laptop along with me as I go through the topics in the video. Okay, so you should therefore have the Jamovi file open on your laptop that I have posted in the topic 1 pre-lab instructional materials folder. And so that's this data set here. It's the same data set that we were working with last class that contains the data for this little imaginary survey of 8 people. So I want you to have that open on your computer and be able to work with it and access it as you are watching the video. We're going to keep it pretty simple today, just going over a few things about the Jamovi environment that are important to know as we go forward. All right, so the Jamovi environment is pretty simple. There are these 4 tabs across the top left-hand side. All right, we are mostly going to be using the data and analysis tab throughout the semester. Now, today we're actually not going to use the analyses tab. We're just going to be mostly hanging out in the data tab and a little bit of time in the variables tab. So let's start with the data tab. Everyone make sure they're clicked on this tab. The data tab is the spreadsheet part of Jamovi. So it's where all of the raw data lives. This is really similar to Excel or Google Sheets. It's just a spreadsheet. So you've got your columns, right, which are the up and downs, your rows, which go across. And generally, in any spreadsheet program, which we went over last week, the cells are labeled by their column and row. So rows are given numbers and columns are generally given letters. And so if I said, find column C3, find cell C3 in this data sheet, then you would want to, so C, that means column, the third column, A, B, C. This is column C, and then row 3, and that highlighted cell there is therefore cell C3, exactly the same as Excel. What you are also going to notice is that the screen is divided into 2 sections. Just as default, it looks like this, right? There's this spreadsheet part, that is the data tab, and there's this other part that says results, just has that, and then nothing else except a couple of references. So what we're going to see is that when we start to work with this tab and do analyses on the data, all of the output from the analyses will appear in this section here. Okay, but we're not going to be using it today. And so we can actually move it over if you don't want to see that, and it just looks a little cleaner. So you can drag this results window over to make it bigger or to basically make it disappear. All right. At this point, you might be wondering, well, here's the spreadsheet for Jamovi. It looks a lot like a spreadsheet that I might find in Excel or Google Sheets. Kind of what's the point of using this? And what I'm going to point out to you next is some of the features of Jamovi that just makes it a lot easier to navigate variables. And this is particularly the case with data sets that are large and have many variables. There are lots of cases where you might be working with a data set, with thousands of participants and hundreds of variables, and programs like Jamovi just make it much easier to navigate these data sets. And so I'm going to point out some of the features that make this true. Okay. So the first really nice feature of Jamovi for working with variables like this is something called the variable information window. Okay, so to get a variable information window for any given column, which is just a variable, right? You are going to double click on any column. Okay, so we're going to double click on what is your religion column, right? So this column was what is your religion? Double click on that. By the way, you could make that column bigger to be able to see the actual heading of this column. All right, so this area here that I'm circling, that is the variable information window. You can see that there is a variable information window for each variable, and you can navigate back and forth between them using these arrows here. So if I click the forward next variable button, now I see the variable information window for the what is your GPA question, and so on and so forth. All right, so each variable has an information window. And this becomes really handy for containing information about that variable. It just makes all of the information that you need about that variable available with just the click of a button. So when you import data into Jamovi from Excel, which is almost always how you get your data into Excel, because often you're using some kind of online data collection tool like Google Forms, and pretty much the default that all of those programs will download the data into is Excel. So then you just have to import your Excel file into Jamovi, right, which we did last week. So when you have this data that you're just starting out with, that's just been imported, you are going to have to edit some of the variable information window to get the most use out of it. The first thing you're going to want to edit is the variable name and description window. So this that I'm highlighting right now, that's the variable name. That's for the variable name. And then below, this is the description of the variable. I want to point out to you that Jamovi automatically uses the information from the first row of the Excel file for the name. So what I mean by that is just to remind you that this was the example data that we are using. And so here's the survey, right? This like hypothetical survey, an online survey. And so the first question is, what is your gender identity? And then when we download the data from this survey into Excel, this is what this looks like here. You see how it downloads, it downloads the question name as the first row, okay, for this variable. And then what Jamovi does, and so in the next one, what is your religion? That's the first row. What's your GPA, etc. So Jamovi just grabs that first row and by default inserts it as the variable name in the variable information window. But that's actually not ideal to have the exact question wording as the variable name, because what you're going to find is when you go and produce output for each of these variables, it looks kind of messy and clunky and sometimes cuts it off if the variable name is long like this. So a good rule of thumb that I usually do is to copy and paste the exact question wording into the description. So I'm literally just copying this, which I'm doing by highlighting and pressing Control-C. Okay, that's not letting me right click to do this, but I'm just going to highlight, press Control-C, and then put my cursor down in the description tab and press Control-V. So now we have the actual question wording in the description window, and I'm going to delete this and change it to something just shorter that still tells me what the variable is, but in a shorter way. Okay, so gender, right? Makes sense. Okay, so that's what we want for each variable information window. We want a kind of a short and sweet name, and then we'll put the exact question wording in the description window so that if we ever kind of need to remember what the exact question wording was, then we can go right back to the variable information window and have that information right there. Okay, so let's go through right now, and you do this along with me in the data set that you have open on your computer, and we are going to go through each variable and change the name and the description. Okay, so for what is your religion, copy what is your religion into the description window, and then use just the word religion for the name. For this one, GPA, again, copying the question wording, and you can just say GPA is our variable name. This one is a really long one. It's the one, oh yeah, indicate the extent to which you agree with the statement, I like pizza. So that's really long. You would never want that as a variable name, obviously. So, but you might want to be reminded of how exactly they asked that question. And so that's why we like to keep the description information in in Jamovi when we're working with this variable. But let's change its name to just pizza. All right. So this is a good example of, say, you're working with this variable and you see the name is pizza. And you might be like, oh, I can't exactly remember what we asked about pizza. And that's why the description is really handy, because you're like, oh yeah, it was this question about agreeing or disagreeing with the statement, I like pizza. And then finally, how many first cousins do you have? We can just call that cousins. All right, so now we have gone and edited the variable name and description for each variable. The other part of the variable information window that you sometimes have to edit is the measure type and data type. Okay. Remember, measure type is when we're talking about the different types of variables, which we covered in lecture. But the Jamovi program uses slightly different language for some of the types of variables. And on the handout, I've kind of indicated that, right? So nominal would also be known as like a categorical variable. An ordinal variable is what I refer to in lecture and the text as a rank order numeric variable. Continuous variable would be the same as what in lecture and text was referred to as equal interval numeric, okay? And then there's also the type, a measure type that is an ID variable, which we're just not gonna pay attention to. So you're gonna be checking all of your variables to make sure Jamovi correctly identified it as nominal, ordinal, or continuous. All right, so let's go through. Okay, we'll start with gender, and it picked nominal. That's what we want. Religion, it also got nominal right. Religion is a categorical variable. GPA, it got that right. It picked it as a continuous variable. And now what about the pizza variable? Okay, so this, if you look at the question, I like pizza, and it has the 1 to 5 scale, that is most accurately labeled as a ordinal variable, an ordinal variable, right? Because it's those kind of like rank order categories. It's a quantitative variable, it's numeric, but it's not the same precision of measurement as something like GPA. So this is an ordinal variable, so you want to change that. And the same thing with cousins. Now, this is an example of a variable that, it could be either continuous, marked as either continuous or ordinal. Some variables are like that, and in that case, it doesn't matter. You could pick continuous or ordinal. So either one would be correct. So usually Jamovi is pretty good at identifying continuous variables when they are when they have like decimals in them, when they're truly like continuous equal interval variables. It's pretty good at identifying that. It's good at identifying nominal variables. Where it will sometimes make mistakes is with these variables that are ordinal or that kind of could be either ordinal or continuous. So you just have to check that, right? Data type is the other thing that sometimes you have to check. Usually Jamovi is pretty good at this. So you can see data types are either text, decimal, or integer. Text data type is when the data is words, right? As is the case for the gender and the religion variable. Decimal is a numeric variable where decimals are included, right? So GPA, right? There's decimals there. So it correctly identified the GPA variable as decimal. Integer is another type of data that you want to have correctly identified. And integer is when the data is numeric, but it is a whole number only, right? So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no decimals. And that will be the case for the pizza variable and the cousins variable. So usually it does a pretty good job of automatically selecting the correct data type, but you should always check. All right, the next thing that we are going to turn our attention to here is the levels window. Okay, you can see it's in teeny tiny writing, but the heading to this window is levels. What this window does here is pick up every value for a given variable that was selected by individuals who completed the survey. Okay, so what I mean by that is, so say, going back to this is the survey here, right? So what is your gender identity question? You can see that we actually had 4 choices. Okay, there was male, female, prefer not to say, and non-binary were the choices. And in the levels window, there's just female, male, and non-binary. So Jamovi doesn't know that prefer not to say was a category because that phrase did not get put into the data set because no one selected it. So just keep that in mind, that the levels window is only going to pick up on values that are actually in the data set. All right, so just keep that in mind, that there may be some values that don't appear in your levels window if they were not chosen by participants. The next thing I want to point out about the levels window and what you can do with it is that you can add a text label to any numerical value, right? So for example, the pizza variable. So, and this is for ordinal integer numbers. Okay, you can add a text. You can add words that are associated with numeric levels. So recall that in this question, 1 was strongly disagree, 2 was disagree, etc. And so you can add those labels to your levels value, to your levels window, if you want to. There's situations where this would be beneficial, and you might want to do this. So you don't have to, but you can. So I just want to show you this. So in this case, I'm just clicking on the 1 and I'm writing strongly disagree over top of it. And kind of the nice thing is that it remembers the number and adds a text label to it. So go ahead and follow along with me and add the words to each number. So 2 is disagree, 3 is neutral, 4 is agree, and 5 is strongly agree. All right, and then you can see that when you do that, it changes the spreadsheet to the words instead of the numbers. Another thing you can do with the levels window is move the order of the values around. Okay, so here's an example of a situation where you might want to do this. And for this, I'm going to say, going to imagine we added one more variable. We had one more variable in the survey, and it was a variable like this. So say we had this additional variable and it looked like this. So it was assessing how often participants attended religious services in the last month. And frequency, this is not the best way to measure this variable, but we'll just go with it. So here were the levels, right? I never attend, only attend on holidays, weekly, once, twice a month, 3 times a month, etc. Right? So the levels are quantitative in the sense that there's this gradient from never attending to only attending on holidays to once or twice a month, 3 times a month, weekly, and more than once a week, right? So there is a quantitative order to the levels, but they are out of order in the levels window, right? So what we can do using these arrows is rearrange the values so that they are in quantitative order. So here's what I mean. So we want the least frequent attendance value to show up first on this list. And so that would be I never attend. So we're going to click on that value and use the arrow to move it up. So then what's the next least frequent attendance? Would be probably I only attend on holidays or special occasions. So that's in the second position. So that's good. The next one, the next most frequent would be about 1 to 2 times a month. So we're going to move that there. About 3 times a month, weekly, and then more than once a week. So now the levels are in quantitative order. And we wanted to do this because if we go and try to get charts or do any kind of analyses with this variable, we want the levels to be in quantitative order. All right, so anytime you have a situation like this with text data, so it's data that's been read in from a survey as text, but it is an ordinal variable, you want to put those levels into their quantitative order. Okay, so that's pretty easy to do. So I know you don't have this variable in your data set, but I think you can get the idea. So, why don't you could go in and practice with one of the other variables, just practice moving the levels around. For the categorical variables, it doesn't matter. Just make sure you know how to use those arrows to move the levels in the levels window around if you wanted to. All right, so that covers the variable information window. You've now learned how to get it and how to edit the name and description, how to change the measure and data type, and how to work with value labels in the levels window. The very last thing I want to show you in this video is the variables tab. Okay, so we're going to click on the variables tab, and I just want to show you that by clicking on the variables tab, by the way, if you want to get rid of the variable information window, just click on this hide key. So if you are in the variables tab, it gives you just a list of the variables names and descriptions. And this is really handy, especially when you are working with large data sets, as we are going to be doing for most of the assignments in this class. And it has this nice feature where you can search for a variable. So if I type in pizza, it just shows me the pizza variable. And if I double click on it, then it will take me to its variable information window. So again, if you're trying to find one specific variable in a data set with hundreds of variables, this is really handy. Okay. And then if you want to have all of your variables reappear, just delete what you have in the search window and all of them will come up again. All right. So that is it for the first instructional video. And I'm going to give you some more instructions in class at the very beginning of your next lab session, and then you will do the assignment. And if you have watched this video, followed along with it, done all the things that I instructed you to in Jamovi along with me, then you should be golden for the assignment and it should all be good.